Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Parts and Service. Before I start, I want to give a shout out to my Patreons: Chris Zero, Seth Lord, CyberDragon725, Mora, Miski Haza, Borealis German, Aaron25746, Spicy Ica, Jack Afton, Folus Ersk, Melissa, Trendy Dude 3, Kyan Gray, Kevin Seasmore, and Lifesmore123. Thank you for your support, guys. You don't have to, but I'm thankful that you are helping any way you can. Now, that's out of the way. We can begin with the video. Right now, you're just watching me play around with BonBon just so I had something to show for this part. So, let us begin. If he doesn't bite me, which he is about to. Before we get to the teardown, I want to show that this project is going to be using a few key components. For example, this 3mm bearing, which it's not the best that I've had, but it does do wonders. Also, we're going to be using just some simple heat inserts. This one is pretty toasty because it's been used a couple times and I've had to pull it out. And around, I think these are 8 to 10mm screws. Sorry, 3mm in diameter, about 8 and 10 in length. Can't really remember exactly what they are, but they get the job done. So, before I can actually put the new arms together, I have to take the old ones apart, which you can see me doing here. Mainly just, unscrewing all the old parts and trying my best not to break them. But you got to speed it up just because it took a long time just to get these darn screws out, especially these 3mm ones. They were in there. Now you can probably notice this servo, which is their shoulder tilt, there's a lot of hot glue on there. It's not the best job I did, and it kept it on there. It hasn't fallen off. The only issue is now I have to use this scraper just to break it off the part, which at first I almost knocked it off the table just because how thick the glue was. But eventually it just came right off. Wow, that was poor timing. But yeah, you can see there's a lot of glue, and I kind of shaved the side of the servo. But it's still intact, and it still will work. Just gotta shave off that excess glue so it fits properly on the next piece. Same thing for the other arm, just unscrew the servo that makes the shoulder, and then remove the part that was holding that from the servo inside of his upper arm. Now, the pain with these servo screws is that sometimes they get stuck, so I had to use this neutrino magnet I put in a sock just so I didn't worry about it getting stuck to the mat. And I'm surprised it didn't just fly right out, but eventually it came right off. And out comes the last servo. And the good thing about this design, they just easily slide in and out without any problems. Originally, these 3mm screws, they just screw directly into the 3D part. I didn't get the inserts until later after I came up with this design, so I had to implement the inserts into the newer design just so it makes sense. And these inserts do wonders. Parts barely flex. That's if I install them correctly. Now that servo's out, we can move on to BonBon's wrist mechanisms. And as you can see, these parts use two things that are not really good for me anymore: a lot of hot glue and 2mm screws. The screw right there, that's just a simple little screw that comes with the servo. But the little one up there, the one I have to try the screwdriver, got no grip. It's completely thrown out. So I have to use these pliers to get it loose. And then I have to twist the part just to get the screw out. Luckily, I'm not going to be using this part, so it doesn't really matter to me. But this bearing, you can see, it's not coming out. And it's really stuck in there. And I was already frustrated, so instead of just breaking the part, I decided just to melt it out. Now luckily, I didn't really heat it up for that long, so the bearing isn't damaged, but the plastic was molten enough to where it would just easily pop out after I slammed on the desk a couple times. Yeah, I was getting very thin with my patience nearing the end of this, because this video took 2 days to record, just because so busy. But I got the bearing out, and I call that a success, even though it was very violent and dirty. Now this servo head is not stuck on using a screw. Instead, I just use a ton of hot glue, and the hot glue's so thick, I can't really get the screw in there to detach the head, so I have to use good old Mr. Torch to blow out some heat. Luckily, I didn't destroy the part by doing that. Just enough heat to get the glue melted so I can get the screwdriver in there and detach the servo head. I need to reuse these servo heads because the servos I have come with very few. And guess what happens when you forget a neutrino magnet is right next to your workstation? Magnetism happens. Now that I have the head off, I can now reuse the servo head for the other parts of his project. So now that his old arms are torn down, I can now reuse all these servos for his new arm design. All I need to do is get another one of these blue 5-gram servos and replace this servo with a newer one. The sky, it gives a gift! A new servo! So these are the actual shoulder joints that his arms will hang off of. Originally I didn't use heat inserts, but with these new ones, it's kind of a must. Also, you can see how there are the 2 bearings for each part. This is how I keep them almost perfectly aligned. It also helps the servo not have to do all the heavy lifting. The bearings, keep everything somewhat perfectly aligned, so it's less stressful. Yeah, but before I put these heated inserts in there, the thing would basically wiggle off. Now for these heated inserts, you have to keep the star facing out, and it really doesn't take much heat. About a couple seconds, or a little bit too much, as that is glowing red, and you just let it slide on in. And out it goes. And there you go. I usually like to press it on the table so it flattens it out, but if you do it slow enough, it will just go in just fine. Now, you're not supposed to use a torch, you're supposed to use a soldering iron. They're supposed to have these little special attachments that the heat inserts sit on, and they slowly heat up, so you can slowly and precisely put them into the part. Not like that. I scraped all the glue, which didn't take that much effort. I thought it would actually take a lot more, but came right off. So now I have to reattach the servo to their 3D printed part with good old Mr./Mrs. Hot Glue. The only issue is I was nearly running out, so I was panicking. I might not be able to do this, but I had to, be sparing with the hot glue and also load it properly. But out it finally comes. There we go. Like slather it on there like butter on toast. That's clear and stickier and also very hot. Use a nice firm press of the hands, but that's not really good enough, so I got these clamps. Clamp that son of a gun right down and it will not move. Mostly. I did drop it. No, wait. I dropped this one. Yeah, that's the one I dropped. Luckily, the clamps don't pop off, so the glue dried and they're not going anywhere. So now I have to slide these pieces into his shoulder joints, but they're side base, so I had to mirror the parts when I 3D printed them, so only this part will fit into this arm because it's mirrored. The other designs further down his arm are perfectly symmetrical, so you don't have to worry about mirroring the parts for forgetting to, I'd accidentally forgot to print the opposite of what I was supposed to. Thanks to these heat inserts, I don't have to really worry about these parts coming apart. The only issue is I gotta be careful because if I do it too tight, I might just knock the heat insert out of the part and it'll spin freely. Mostly because of the friction of the, be constantly spinning the screw. The heat's gotta go somewhere. But now those two parts are done. And now, after that, we install the servo that goes into his arm that will actually twist his elbow around. I know it kind of looks weird to have the servo horn screwed into the part, but trust me, that was the best thing I can come up with. And it works. It holds the servo in place, and it attaches it pretty firmly. I don't have to worry about it wiggling too much. Now, remember when I said that these 2mm screws strip easily? Yeah, those stripped very easily. So now, if I want to replace that part, I'm going to have to do it manually with a pair of pliers. But now those two parts are on, which are directly screwed into the servo, so there's no way that's going to wiggle around. Maybe. I still got that part didn't have a bearing installed, but after I installed the bearing, I put the servo arms back on. This one was using an actual 3mm steel pin. The other one was just using a 3mm screw I had lying around because I couldn't find the box that the pins were in, so I had to use what I had. There's really no difference, and the arms don't act any different. But when I assembled them at the time, I didn't realize I had to take them apart because I have to assemble from the wrist backwards, if that makes any sense. Since I have to use this piece to screw into his forearm, which then screws into these pieces that will need to have nuts installed, and when the servo for his elbow, when that arm is on the servo, it makes it difficult for me to tighten the screws. So I had to take them off and then install them last. But once I get them in there, which as you can see, the servo head is somewhat perfectly symmetrical. It ain't perfect. Nothing is. But the part that holds the end of his wrist that tilts up and down, it did. At first I was using 3mm screws, but I forgot that the heads of the screws will collide with one another. So what I ended up doing, I just drilled an exact 3mm hole using a metric drill set I had, and just completely script using screws, and just use these pins instead, which made it a lot easier. I also dabbed with some hot glue later on just so that it wouldn't, pop out. It's a little wiggly, but that's only because that if I tighten that screw too much on that servo, the servo will get stuck and overheat. And these 5-gram servos, they're very sensitive and very expensive, so I kind of had to sacrifice one for the other. But in terms of movement of his wrist, it comes just fine. And since this servo is going to be inside of his, his hand, paw, whatever you want to call it, all I really have to do is just screw it in, and there she goes. And ta-da! I have 3 servos working together to make his wrist tilt up and down and all around. You're probably noticing that his paw looks weird on the seam. That's because that when I designed the paw with the servo that I made in CAD, it wasn't perfect, and I kept having trouble getting a line, so I just said, screw it. Just squish together and hot glue it. But it works! And here we go. The arm fully assembled. His left arm fully assembled. It's a little stiff in some areas, but I just got to go back in there and tighten and loosen things up. You might be wondering why his shoulder joints to the torso are done last. Well, I need this empty space so I can actually screw the parts onto the servos. And also, it just makes it easier so I don't have to worry about the arm just dangling piece by piece. So I don't have to rotate his torso and let that get in the way, so I just sort of do it this way. Just, work out the process little bit by bit. Also, I didn't actually add the metal servo head to that other servo just yet, but I will eventually. Right now, this is just me sort of speeding through and just putting all the holes in place to connect the arm. As you can see, the arm, I'm installing it at its, like a T-pose, so the minimum and maximum is kind of similar to a real arm. It may not be the best option, but hey, it works. And there you go. Fully assembled, fully kind of built. Still need to do some paint for his torso, and I might need to, I might paint those parts black, or I might put some black cloth over it. And, yeah. I'll do an animation test, hopefully tomorrow. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you. Like, share, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Thank you again to my Patrons. Link will be in the description if you're interested. Yeah, that's it. Have a nice day, guys. Bye.